It's the final talk of the day, and to give that talk is the author of The Complete David Bowie, Nicholas Pegg.
It's a great pleasure for me to be here. What a great day we've had, haven't we? And as you know, the theme of today is David Bowie in time, and we couldn't have hoped for a finer guest to close off the panels today. He's a man who needs no introduction, and he's right here, but he's going to get one anyway. His work, as I'm sure you know, encompasses everyone from Marc Bolan to Thin Lizzy, from Adamant to Sparks, from Hazel O'Connor to Hazy Fantasy. But of course, to me and to you and to all of us here, we know him best and we cherish him most for his unrivaled work over so many years with David Bowie, a collaborative, creative relationship and a personal friendship as well that lasted, what, nearly 50 years. Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, Tony Visconti. So, Tony, I would like to start by asking you to tell us a story which I guess some of us might already know. In fact, if you were watching the film at the beginning of today, I think you might have seen it in there. But it just seems apposite, and it's a great story. The theme is David Bowie in time, so let's get in our time machine and go back. It's 1976, and the phone rings, and it's David and it's Brian Eno, and they want to know if you'd like to come and help them with their latest project. Would you like to take up the narrative?
Sure. Well, it was really nice to get that phone call. They were in Switzerland at the time, and I don't know where I was. I was on the Whirl somewhere, you know, and these phones are amazing inventions. You never know who you're talking to, where they are. But anyway, they said, we have an idea to make a new album. It's going to be experimental. And that made my ears perk up because, you know, you don't want to do the mundane thing anymore. And especially with David, he's such a, you know, an iconic shaper, you know, and so you got to go with the flow with those two guys. Yeah. I never worked with Brian before. So, so we got together and we discussed it. And we just booked studio time. I don't know if we stuck to any kind of a script. I can't remember that well if we did or not. But I knew what he did. I knew he was in Roxy Music, and I knew he made weird sounds and stuff. And he had that that suitcase, which is on in the British, the V&A.
Yeah.
It's a suitcase synthesizer by a British company called EMS. And they made lots of other good synthesizers, but this one was in a briefcase. You could almost look like a James Bond spy carrying it through customs and all. I'm sure they always got searched. But it was a wild little thing, and it didn't actually make a sound of its own. Brian, you'd have to plug your guitar in there, one end, and then the other end you put into the console, the recording console, or a guitar amp. And then Brian would just go wild on the knobs while you're playing something, and you go, and you'd stop playing. Is that me? You know, it was so weird. It was such a weird experience. And in the end, David loved it so much he bought his own. So we used it on subsequent albums as well. But that was a key element to the album, all the sounds that were done with that one.
It had a kind of a joystick, is that right, in the middle, that created some of those sort of shimmering noises that you hear on Heroes. That's that.
Almost like an arcade game.
Yeah.
You know, it had the joystick, and you could change the parameters of that. It either would change the pitch or the tonality, or it had like noise, static noise, or take it away. So it had a multiple purpose joystick. I mean, ideally, I think they came out one with two joysticks which was even more great.
Yeah,
you know? And it had a mono output. So I had to use special effects to make it stereo, to like when it was in the song, when I was mixing the song, I would pan Brian's stuff left and right with the pan control. They didn't make a stereo EMS yet.
Yeah. So that was the gadget that Brian brought along, but of course you delighted them over the phone by telling them about another gadget that you had just acquired.
Yeah, well, I was good friends with a company called Eventide, and the man who owns it is a guy called Tony Agnello, a fellow Brooklyn Italian, by the way. And Italiano, come sta lei? So anyway, you all speak Italian. It's amazing.
They're a bright lot, this, you know.
I said, how are you in Italian? So anyway, so where was I? I was speaking
the Eventide.
The Eventide, yeah. So he invented this thing called the harmonizer. And it dropped the pitch of, or I don't think you could raise the pitch, but you could, at that time, and you could drop the pitch of a tone. So if you put it in there like, oh, like that with the knob, you know. And prior to that, you had to do that with tape. But what you would get would be not only the pitch dropping, but you would get a slowdown in speed, which is something we didn't want, or we never really wanted that all the time. Sometimes it was a fun thing to make the track slow down a bit. But what we wanted was just the pitch to slow down, and Tony went and invented this machine that could do that. And that's why I say it fucks with the fabric of time. You know, you're not a slave to the tape machine. You have your own, you're the wizard of time itself, and you could do this magical stuff with this box.
Fantastic, fantastic. And so is that what we hear maybe a bit later on Scream Like a Baby, when David's voice goes higher and lower but maintains the same tempo on
Yes.
Scary Monsters? Yeah, that's
Yes.
so it had all those kind of applications. That's
Yeah, I think by that time I used a virtual one, because
Right.
they make it for computers now.
Yeah.
But it used to be an outside gear thing.
Yeah, yeah. Terrific. So I thought that might be an apposite story to begin on, because the theme is David Bowie in time. We've only got an hour and we've got so much to talk about. So when Tony and I were discussing this earlier on, we thought what we'd do for the rest of this talk is basically fuck with the fabric of time and get in our time machine and hop about all over the place. Because if we start at the beginning and just go chronological, we'll never get there. We'll be somewhere in 1977 and our time will be up. So let's try and cover as much ground as we can. And there will, of course, be time for some questions from you guys towards the end. So if you have any questions for Tony, start thinking about what you'd like to say. But so before we even get in our time machine, I guess the first thing I'd like to say is welcome back to London, because the last time you were here, I think, was only a few months ago when you were touring with Holy Holy, with Woody, and of course with your lovely daughter Jessica, who's here with us today.
Glenn Gregory.
And Glenn Gregory, of course, of Heaven 17 on lead vocals, and a whole wonderful band, James Stevenson and all sorts of people. How does it feel after all these years to be taking songs from The Man Who Sold the World and those early albums out on tour?
It was wonderful, and David asked me the same question, kind of, he says, why are you doing this? And it started out with the Man Who Sold the World album. He goes, why are you doing this? I said, we never toured when I was in the band with Woody then, but when we finished The Man Who Sold the World, we never went out on tour to publicize or play to groups of people in different cities, or even publicize the album. It just went like that. It was cut off. And he says, "Oh, you're right." I said, "Well, now I'm pushing that album. I'm very proud of that album, and so is Woody. Woody was the drummer on that. Mick Ronson was the guitarist, but he wasn't with us anymore. But we had James Stevenson and people who knew Mick Ronson like it was in their own DNA.
Yeah.
So it's a fabulous show." And he says, "Oh, okay. Well, he didn't really." He said, "Can I see some of it?" We had some of it on film, and he got. I don't know how I should phrase this, but when he heard Glenn sing, and Glenn's a great singer, but he didn't like it.
Okay.
And I went, "Well, it's the best we've got." I said, "You're welcome to join the band if you want." He was still alive, and he could have come with us, and he went, ha ha.
Yeah. So who's seen Holy Holy over the years? Yay.
Thank you.
Fantastic show, right? Fantastic band. I mean, really, really wonderful stuff. So I guess we ought to hop in our little TARDIS now and go right back. Let's go right back to the beginning. So we're in, the spring, summer of 1967, and
Yes.
a young musician from Brooklyn has just arrived in London for the first time, and then only really maybe a couple of months later is introduced to this young musician from London who's just released his first album.
Yes.
What was that first meeting like?
Well, I got my ticket to ride to London from when I was in New York. I worked with a record producer called Denny Cordell. He worked for a company in London called Essex Music. and he had his own production company called Straight Ahead Productions. So I helped him out with a Georgie Fame album. He was working on Georgie Fame, and he had a song he wanted to record with these red-hot New York musicians. And I said, can I see the arrangements? And he said, what arrangements? I go, you know, the charts, the notes that the musicians are going to play off, because he played the demo for me. And he says, we don't do that. Well, do it that way. I said, well, how do you record a song like this in London? He goes, well, we call up a certain guy, and this hashish arrives, and then we roll joints, we smoke a lot, and we listen to the demo. And I said, how long does that take? He goes, 8 to 10 hours. And I can imagine. So I said, well, in New York, you'd be crucified. If you did that in this New York studio, they would charge you $1,000 each. If you spent 8 hours with the musicians union people, you know, they've got bylaws and scale rates and all that. So he turned, a whiter shade of pale, and he said, well, what are we going to do? So I wrote these charts, quick chord charts, and I ran down the road to A&R Studios, and the session was a complete success. And he looked at me with great admiration, and this is really funny, this part, and he goes, I think I'd like you to come back to London to work with me. He says, you're really fast, and you know what you're doing. I said, yeah. He goes, but there's one person I want to ask first. There is another person I have in mind. I go, oh, who is that? He goes, Phil Spector. So Tony or Phil Spector? Tony won!
Well, I think we can be thankful for that for any number of reasons. And then, so you were settled in London, and you kind of made your name with, among other things, with your string arrangements.
Yes.
And the way that you put extra, and you worked with, I think, The Move quite early on, is that right?
Move,
yeah. And then you were introduced to David, who had just recently released his first album. How did that meeting come about?
That was very interesting, because I was summoned to the CEO's office, David Platts. He was the head of Essex Music, and the company I was assigned to as a writer in New York was a sister company. So it was like easy transferal of loyalties. And he said, we have an artist that we don't really know what to do with. And he said, can I play you a couple of cuts off this record? And he produces David's D-Ram album. And I'm looking at this lovely young man, this smiling face on the cover and all that. So he puts it down there, and he does a few needle drops, and he plays 3 songs. And David, in those days, you couldn't pin him down like I guess nowadays either. It was just 3 completely different songs, like Mr. Gravedigger and Love You Till Tuesday. And they go, and he said, what do you think? I said, I think he's all over the place. And I think he really needs focus. He's got to do the one thing he does right. And when I heard, like, I don't know if it was When I Live My Dream, but it's when he used to sing like Anthony Newley. Yeah. It was like, it was so close to Anthony Newley. I said, why do you do that? He goes, well, I want us doing music theater as well, but maybe, Ken Pitt actually was forcing him. He had a manager called Ken Pitt. He called me a commie pinko. Pinko commie, by the way.
Pinko commie, yeah.
Because I took his David away from him.
Right.
He had to find something wrong with me. But I'm not a communist. I admire the philosophy, but I'm not a communist. And I'm not a pinko. Whatever a pinko is. So he says, well, he said, would you like to meet him? And I said, sure, yeah. I thought we were going to make an appointment till next Wednesday or something like that. He goes, he's in the next room. So it was a setup, folks. And opens the door, and there he is, a gorgeous little young man, big smile on his face, grinning from ear to ear. He knew that I was going to be introduced to him. I didn't know I was going to be introduced to him. So we sit down, and we talk for a while, and we find out that we love Phil Spector and the Ronettes and American R&B records. We talk about immediately went into a musical conversation. And then I said to him, then we were kicked out of the office. It was 6 o'clock. That was like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We're chatting away till 6 o'clock. And I said, well, we better leave now. And this is Oxford Street, 68 Oxford Street, otherwise known as Dumbarton House. So write that out for factoids. And so we walked out of Dumbarton House, and we took a right on Oxford Street and ended up in Hyde Park Corner somehow. And then all of a sudden we ended up in Chelsea. I don't know how. We just kept talking and talking and walking, and we got to a point where we didn't know what else to say to each other. And then we knew that Roman Polanski just put out a new film called A Knife in the Water. And we were right near that cinema in Chelsea where they were doing art films. I forgot the name of the cinema.
Yeah, anyone? Help us out here. The cinema in Chelsea.
They're all too
anyway,
young.
That one, yes.
They wouldn't know.
Regents?
I don't know.
Anyway, but it was in Chelsea.
So we go in there and we see A Knife in the Water, which is a
Yeah.
terrifying film. It's really strange. It was my introduction to Roman Polanski. And afterwards, we just didn't know what else to do. He had to catch a train back to Beckenham.
Yeah.
And we hugged each other. We were firm friends from that point on. We shared this experience of seeing a horrible, dismal film. And that's what makes friends.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. The beginning of a beautiful friendship. And it wasn't long after, it was really quite soon after that you started working together in the studio. And I mean, the first two tracks you did, I looked up in a very good book to make sure I got this right. The first two tracks you did on the same day, you did Let Me Sleep Beside You and Karma Man. Yeah. Two songs which I think immediately show that the maturity of David's songwriting, but also what you were bringing to the table. It was, no disrespect to Mike Vernon who did the album, but it's definitely a leap forward, isn't it? Those two tracks. Do you remember those songs coming up?
The reason why I liked Karma Man was it had Buddhism in it, and he was seeing a Buddhist monk, Chimi Rinpoche, and then later on through him I met Chimi. And I actually studied with him. I studied Tibetan Buddhism for several years with Chimi, and I've seen him as recently as about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
He's
still going strong, isn't he? Yeah.
Not strong, but he's still going. You know what the problem they have? Tibetans are they're born in Himalayas where the air is rarefied, and they have a problem coming down to Earth here, and sometimes they fly down. But when they come down to Earth, the atmosphere is too dense for their lungs. It's just too much oxygen and nitrogen and whatever else is in the air. But anyway, we met, so Karma Man is written about Chimi, and through David I met Chimi at the Buddhist Center in London. And we became really good friends, and as I say, he's still with us.
Yeah. And then many, 30 or more years later, interestingly, David went back to those two songs, among others, were ones that he re-recorded for the Toy album, which was shortly before Heathen, which was around about the time that after a period of not working together, you got back together again. Yeah. So that must have been there was a time when David didn't really, anything prior to About Space Oddity, he didn't really go there anymore, but he resurrected these old songs from the 60s.
Yes.
Did he talk to you about that at the time? I mean, later on I'm talking about now.
He played everything to me that he did, and I loved what I heard, and again, I had the feeling in my head that he's all over the place.
Yeah.
It's not one style. He wasn't a rocker yet.
Yeah.
He didn't do rock and roll yet. And I told him that, I said, so if we're going to work together, we've got to do something that gets you in the charts, that gets you like with your band on the road, and do some concert tours, and make up your mind what you want to be, And so he went for that.
Yeah.
And on that album, we did that.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you about, in those early days, you were, of course, also, I don't know if it was David who introduced you, but he was friends with Marc Bolan before either of them had hit the big time. And I mean, to the best of my knowledge, there is no one else on the planet who has your insight and experience of what it was like to literally be in the room with those two guys at the dawn of their careers. David had quite contrasting personalities, I think, David and Marc.
Sure. Well, whereas I was introduced to David from David Platts, the CEO, my boss, Denny Cordell, told me about Marc Bolan, and also I listened to the John Peel show, and I hadn't heard Marc yet. But I was listening to John Peel when he had the really funky radio show, and he had Tyrannosaurus Rex on the show. And he just happened to mention that they were playing around the corner in a little nightclub in Tottenham Court Road. So my office was only about a 3-minute walk to that nightclub. And I walked there. I said to Denny Cordell, I said, well, I'm going to do talent scouting now. Because he told me to find a group of my own to work with. I'm going to do it. Tonight I'm going to see this band, Tyrannosaurus Rex, which he did know Marc Bolan, but he didn't know Marc had a band called Tyrannosaurus Rex. So I walk around the corner, go up Tottenham Court Road, go down this staircase, and I hear music wafting up to the staircase. It's really pleasant, you know, guitar and drums and a voice and the backing voice, you know. It was really charming, almost like Eastern music, you know, almost like Indian music or something like that, you know. I go down there, and it's two people on the stage, Marc and Steve Peregrine took, and there was so many kids down there because all I could hear was the music. Usually people are shouting at a gig and, you know, clapping their hands and all that. Yeah. There were about 100 people sitting on the floor, cross-legged, like he was sitting on the floor, cross-legged on stage. So I said, I love this guy. I just love him. I've never heard or seen anything like him. And he was beautiful, too, so handsome. Steve wasn't so handsome, but Marc was. So I gave him my address, and I said, well, come in. You know, I'm working for Denny Cordell, and I said, this is my first night out talent scouting. I think you guys are absolutely great. Gave him the address. I go in to work the next morning. I had to be in at 10. I was employed by this company. You know, I had to, like, punch, you know, the clock or something like that. And I go in, and I said, I found this most amazing band last night. You told me to talent scout, and I can't believe it. My first night out, I found somebody I actually want to work with. And he says, okay, tell me about it. Well, there are two people. I didn't remember Marc's name. I just remembered the name of the group, and they weren't known yet. All of a sudden, the phone rings, and it's Marc out on the street and a call box, when we used to have call boxes on the street. And he says, hello, is that Tony Visconti? And I go, yeah. I was just passing the office. I happen to have my guitar and bongo drum player with me. And can we come up and audition for Denny Cordell? So I said, hold on a second. And I clamped the phone down. I said, Denny, it's the kid I saw last night. Could they come up? And he said, of course. You know, he was really a good guy. He was open to anything, any project, anything like that. So I said, sure, come on up. We're on the second floor. And bang, bang, bang. 10 minutes later, he's up there, 5 minutes, 10 minutes later, and he brought his little carpet that he sat on the night before. He always played on this magic carpet. You know? And they come up and they put the carpet down on the floor and they sit down below his desk. And then he had to, like, look over. And Marc wasn't very tall. So Denny has to look over to see them. So they go into their set and they play about 5 songs from the set. And he says, great, you guys are absolutely great. Let me talk to Tony about you guys. You know, you could, we'll see you, we'll get in touch with you, leave your contact number. So they go out, and he says, well, I don't like them at all. He said, but we'll take them on as our token underground group. Because this underground thing was happening, like Pink Floyd, and, you know, people making underground music, subversive music, you know, take down the government stuff and all that. Yeah. And he says, but we'll sign them. So I remember do you know B.P. Fallon, the journalist? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, he was outside listening to the whole thing, and later, after I left, he said, Denny really hates them. But I got them signed. Yeah? That's the important thing. And we went right into the studio and made the first album, the folk album, which John Peel played to death. Mm-hmm. You know, he was their champion. Without John Peel, they wouldn't have happened. Yeah. And there was My People Were Fair, but had clouds in their hair, but now they're content to wear stars in their brow. That's right. Surprised I remember that. That's beautiful.
Good work, good work. Yeah, it's the longest album title ever, isn't it?
Probably, yeah. Yeah. So that's how it all began with Marc, and we were in the studio almost immediately.
Yeah, yeah. So working with Marc as opposed to working with David in the studio, was it a similar process, or were they quite different sort of creative forces?
Well, ironically, I didn't know that they knew each other.
Right, right.
So they met in Soho when people were wearing military jackets, whatever, you know, they were Soho boys, both of them, and whatever else things you got up to in Soho. I don't know. I don't know things like that, you know. So, but it was really nice that they knew each other. And then Marc was more competitive than David. David was just a nice guy. He was friendly, and he was grateful that he was signed to a label, and he didn't push people around, and he hired people that he liked and could have conversations with and all that, rather than he didn't mind if he had a tough manager, which I think might have been DeFries. Oh, he had Ken Pitt, which I think DeFries took over from Pitt. and all that. But he was like very amicable, very amiable, and all that. Marc, on the other hand, was a true punk.
Right.
He was like, I'm the king of the planet, you know. I'm the king of the world, you know. And he was quite arrogant. Yeah. You wouldn't believe that, because when you saw him on his little television show, he was the cutest, most adorable thing in the world. Behind the scenes, though, he was a punk, you know.
Yeah. On his television show, again, some years later now, and then very shortly before he sadly died, David, of course, round about the time of Heroes, went on Marc's show and indeed performed Heroes, but then performed with Marc, and famously they had a bit of a cock-up and fell off the stage. But you told me an amazing, really very touching story a while ago, which was that apparently on that occasion, which was the last time they ever saw each other, Marc gave David a guitar. Was it a Fender?
Yes, Fender Strat.
Yeah. And then the thing you told me that really broke me up was that those chords, those kind of power chords at the end of Lazarus on Blackstar, that dang, that was David playing that on that very instrument that Marc Bolan gave.
And he had it right. He loved that guitar. He played that guitar more than any other in the studio.
Yeah, that's fabulous to know that, you know, after all those years, it was, I mean, a great instrument, obviously, but the connection with Marc is strong.
It was Marc. It touched him.
Yeah.
Marc played it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also at the end of that show, not many people know this. They said, David and Marc said, let's go to Soho for a dinner.
Yeah.
Go to Chinatown or somewhere like that. So I had my studio on Dean Street, and Good Earth Studios, it was called back then. Now it's called Dean Street Studios. So he took Marc down to my studio, and I hadn't seen Marc, and I kind of fell out, you know. And he took him downstairs to see the whole place. Of course, they let David Bowie in, and I wasn't there. And Marc looked around. He goes, "Oh, I'd love to work here. I'd love to work in this place." So there was every possibility we might get together again. But he died soon after that.
Yeah, very, very sad. And so Dean Street Studios, Good Earth Studios as it was. This is, again, I mean, because you've had a long, you know, relationship with London, haven't you? I mean, you came over here in '67, and it was your hometown for a long, long time before you eventually went back to New York. And so Good Earth, you opened that in, I think, about '74.
Yes.
And David helped you out with some furniture. Is that right?
No, that's different.
Or is that not the same
I had
studio?
a home studio later on.
I beg your pardon.
Yeah. I had the two studios going together.
Right.
He liked the home studio.
Yeah. But I mean, Good Earth, among many other things that you did there, with my Bowie fan brain on, I think I associate it most with Scary Monsters, because you started recording that in New York, and that's where most of the tracking was done.
Yeah.
But then most of the vocals were done a few months later at Good Earth on Dean Street. That right? Yeah.
I had a good situation there. Because the studio was mine, and I was the owner.
Yeah.
I turned it into a haven for all my musical bands, like Thin Lizzy and David. Anyone who had to pay, you don't remember super tax in those days, where wealthy people were taxed over 100%, if you can believe that. But there was the wealth tax went up to 95%, and there was a brief month or two when wealthy British people went over 100%. So you had to give them more money than you earned, So my studio was a safe haven for all my wealthy musicians to make records without saying that they made it in the UK. So what we would do, our little grift, was we would go to Paris and hire a Parisian studio for maybe a day or two and take their track sheets with their logo on it, and we write all the titles that we recorded in Good Earth. And so, we recorded this album in France, see? Here's the evidence. So you had to, everyone was being crucified. Anybody who, not only musicians, but very wealthy people. I know it's a socialist country, but they're all wealthy people who help things along, don't they? And everyone who made any kind of money in this country from the 70s like that were really being given the shaft,
Yeah.
Shaft?
Shaft. Depends on which end of the country you come from. Yeah. So, Good Earth, so the vocals for songs like Fashion and Ashes to Ashes, and of course some overdubs. I think that was where Fripp came in to do his bits as well, wasn't it? Things like that, the later parts of the album. But I think at the time you had just been working with Hazel O'Connor, just prior to that, on the Breaking Glass soundtrack, Eighth Day and all those wonderful songs. And I think you introduced her to David, and she performed an interesting duty for him.
He needed a haircut, and Hazel used to cut my hair, and when I was working with her, and we invited David and Iggy to, I don't know if it was a gig, no, it was a recording session, a Hazel recording session, and she cut both my hair, David's hair, and Iggy's hair. And carried her,
wow.
You know, she was a great, she's still alive, she's still with us, having some health problems, but I adore her. You know?
Yeah, Hazel O'Connor, hairdresser to the stars.
There you go.
Yeah. That is a terrific album. I got it out and listened to it again a while ago, The Breaking Glass. Fantastic stuff. In fact, we were listening to Scary Monsters when driving up here yesterday, and I was just thinking, my God, this is a good album. I mean, that was... I suppose when you go into recording an album, you never quite know, of course, how it's going to turn out, but that one you must have been fairly satisfied with that one by the time you'd finished it, yeah?
Yeah, we recorded all the backing tracks, I think at the Power Station in New York. It's a really big, huge New York studio, one of the finest, and just left it dormant for a few months. David said he loved all the music. He composed all the chords and the beats and all that. We all worked really together. First album without Eno as well, and that was significant, I think, because Eno's great, but that's a certain set, a certain sound, and David just was always moving on, and away from something he's done in the past. This is the way he worked. So we went to the Power Station, and where am I going with this? It was the right place to be.
Yeah.
And we started using New York musicians. They had a walk down, like a spiral staircase that went down to the street about 6 floors, and it had the most amazing reverb in it. And so we used to put guitar amps on the stairwell, close the door, and we would put microphones down like 2 floors below, 5 floors below, and that's how we got this massive sound. We used that on the drums, everything, you know.
Fabulous. Yeah, acoustically, it's just an
A
extraordinary...
lot of echo chambers are found rooms. When people find a great room like it, this is not a good room. But, you hear how short that was. There's no echo there. But when you find a great room, my boss, Danny Cordell, says, you bring it home with you. So that meant like you have the drummer here and the guitar player there, but you put a microphone at the back of the room and you record that on tape as well, and you bring that sound back. And I've been doing it ever since. You know, whether you record in New York or LA or Chicago or Manchester, you bring, if it's a good room, you bring it home with you.
Yeah. Another little piece of magic that I love that happened in London on Scary Monsters was when David decided he wanted a Japanese vocal on the first version of It's No Game. And the translation was done, but it didn't really work as a song, so the kind of way it was done was changed on the hoof. Yeah,
he had a Japanese professor who was a friend of his, and he translated It's No Game into Japanese. So he started to sing it, and he says, I can't sing this. It was phonetic, you know, it wasn't in Japanese, but it was phonetic Japanese. And he's trying to sing it, he didn't even know where it would fit, because the professor gave him a literal translation, not a musical translation, you know, with a meter to it. There was no meter to it.
Yeah.
So our studio lived near the Palladium, only a few blocks away, and they had The King and I, and they had a few Asian women in this cast. So we found one of them who was a singer, she could speak English and Japanese. And she came to the studio, and she tried to sing it herself, and she said, too many words. She goes, I can't fit it in, too many words. So he goes, how about if you just, like, she spoke it to him. He goes, how about if you go in front of the microphone and speak it? Just speak it. So she goes in, and her first thing was very demure, like, you know, she's speaking like that. He goes, no. He gets on the speaker, you know, he presses the button. Do it like a samurai. That was a great coach. Yeah. She was like, she felt that was women liberation.
Yeah.
You know, she didn't want to be this little demure Japanese woman anymore.
Yeah.
She wanted to be like a samurai. And you hear that, listen to that record.
Yeah,
She
it's amazing,
certainly
isn't it?
did it.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. I mean, I say one of my favourites. They're all my favourites. But yeah, that's an incredible piece of work. You were talking about getting the right room, you know, or when you get a good room or when you get a good space. It's making me hop in the TARDIS and go right back again to the Space Oddity album, as we think of it. Of course, it was called David Bowie at the time, wasn't it? But that album anyway. I'm always in awe, because I know back then you didn't, you know, the facilities weren't quite as sophisticated, were they? But that extraordinary achievement that you pulled off with the Wild-Eyed Boy from Free Cloud, you got, what was it, a 50-piece orchestra in there, and literally recorded it live with mics. I mean, that's incredible.
In one take. Yeah. Because the whole studio, Trident Studios, we arrive with 50 musicians. We have 2 hours booked, and their machine broke down.
Oh.
So we'll rehearse it. We'll rehearse it a few times. So I got David to stand right in the middle of the orchestra and to sing it with the orchestra playing. He was scared and thrilled at the same time.
So his vocal was recorded live with the orchestra playing as well?
And we were counting on that, but then when I heard the first take, there was too much of him on like the violin tracks. And There was too much of his voice, so in a mix it would have been hard to take his voice down or up or anything without affecting the other musicians. So by that time, after 2 hours, the band knew the song. They didn't have to read the music anymore. They knew the song. And we recorded it without him. Yeah. And the next day we went into a smaller studio. This was Trident. Mm-hmm. We went to a smaller studio, and he sang the vocal there. Right.
Yeah. Terrific stuff. It's an amazing achievement. And again, so early in your career, really. I mean, it was, you know, fantastic stuff, big time stuff. So let's hop into the time machine again. I'm looking at the time machine here and thinking, gosh, there will be questions from the audience, don't worry. But oh gosh, we've got so much more to cover. Wonderful panel about Berlin that we both watched earlier on today, and we were exchanging glances every now and then. So I think we do need to get the facts here, because there was talk about David's command of German and when he recorded the German vocal for Heroes. How good was his German?
0.
So when he recorded, for example, that vocal, he again, was it really just a phonetic?
He knew a few words, and he could get along in a restaurant.
Yeah.
Try to pronounce it, you know, like you order in German. They could all speak English.
Yeah, of
Futile.
course. Yeah.
And no, his German was 0, and so his French was like we recorded Heroes as Heathen. Yeah. And also we did it héros in French as well. We did 2 versions in foreign language. He was fine with German, and he, I suppose, being an Anglo-Saxon, he was okay with the Saxon bit. And his German was pretty damn good, you know. And Coco Schwab, his assistant, grew up in Switzerland, so she could speak German, Italian, French, and English, obviously. Yeah. And she coached him in German, and also then it came to the French version. And, you know, French is all completely different language. All the R's are in the back of the throat, like, and all that stuff. And so he gets in there, he tries to sing it, and he just rips up, after about 2 tries, he goes, "I hate this language, it's a woman's language." So the French, I don't know if we even released the French version.
Yeah, that came out. Yeah.
Well, we got it in the end.
Yeah. No, it's not too bad. It's quite convincing.
So frustrated with the language. I love the language.
Yeah. Talking of Berlin, I mean, we could spend the whole hour on that, but we had a lovely Berlin panel earlier. But one thing I wanted to ask you about, which I don't think did come up earlier on, is the very last thing that you did with David in Berlin. Of course, we remember those wonderful albums and Heroes and so on. But in 1981, David called you back to Hansa to record the songs from the Baal play, which he'd already filmed the play at the BBC, but he wanted to record a full version with the German pit band. And I think I'm right in saying that's the last thing that he did at Hansa and the last thing you did with him there. Yeah. And tell me a little bit about that. That was, because again, that was quite a sort of live recording, wasn't it?
Well, we got a fantastic arranger to do that, Dominic
Muldowney.
Muldowney. And he did such a great job. He was well-versed with that music of that era. And he got all the crunchy harmonies, and he got it all right. Terrific. Unfortunately, David he had a fever at the time. and he was kind of sweating a lot, but we couldn't, the budget was so, like, expensive for the orchestra.
Yeah.
And we only had like 3 hours in the studio, and he shows up a bit late, and he's like, I don't know, he's taking cough drops or something like that. So it's a one take, and maybe one punch in somewhere in the middle of the song, but he got his wishes because the TV version isn't that hot, you know.
No, he just plays a sort of banjo on it and does
Yeah.
them just like that, doesn't he? But this was with a full band.
I don't think he's playing the banjo either.
No.
He's miming the
Yeah,
banjo.
yeah. Well, I'm astonished to hear you say that because I listened to those, you know, particularly, I think it's a fan favourite, the Drowned Girl, the song on there. And also there's another one which is I love even more, I think, called Remembering Marie A, or Maria A, if we're going to be German, about it. And his vocals sound beautiful. They sound extraordinary.
He loved Kurt Weill.
Yeah.
And he was great on the rest of them.
Yeah, it's incredible to think that his voice wasn't too good that day, but it sounds impeccable to me. Wow, that is. It's one of my personal sort of Desert Island Davids. Is that Bali EP? I think it's absolutely beautiful. And of course, you and Coco got to appear in the video for the Drowned Girl, which was recorded there, and also I think Wild Is the Wind, which was released as a single at the same time. So you recorded those two videos, and you're among the sort of band playing
the bass.
Yeah. Is that the only time you ever appeared in one of David's? I think it was.
Yes.
In one of his videos. Yeah. Was that done?
It was done in my studio.
That was done in London. Oh, in your studio.
Done in Dean Street.
In Dean Street, right. Gosh, the things that went on in that room, eh?
I forget the drummer's name, but we all had to wear these little black jackets like we were jazz musicians from the 60s, you know, late 50s.
Yes, it's a beautiful, it's a very evocative look, isn't it? And the black and white, of course, and it's beautiful. Beautiful stuff. So let's hop in the TARDIS yet again, because there's so much to talk about. I'd like to talk about Heathen, which is another. I mean, it was at the time an album that it was very highly praised. It was. The joke had already become, this is his best one since Scary Monsters, which was said about every single album, but that one seemed to be the one that really smashed through that, and everyone went, wow, David Bowie really is back in the zone. This is one of his best albums ever. And the recording of that one was unusual, because he normally recorded in cities, by and large, didn't he? But you were up in the Catskill Mountains.
Yeah, 100 miles north of New York.
Yeah.
During that album, I might point out, we had that 9/11.
Happened during,
And there was a balcony, and we could see New York burning 100 miles away.
Wow.
We could see the city burning for 3 days. And then we went back, and I remember, there was like family, you know, his family was there in the city, but they were safe. And they found a safe haven, you know, away from them.
Yeah.
But it was quite close to where he used to live down there,
Yeah, absolutely, Yeah, that must have been quite terrifying. Mm-hmm. And you told me an interesting story about when David arrived for the beginning of recording. It was called All Air Studios, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you said, again, we're back to haircuts, but you just had an unusual haircut, and he didn't recognize you.
I shaved my head.
You shaved your head?
I shaved it completely, yeah. And I just thought, it was a summer, I thought, let's just, it was a country studio. We're gonna do the whole album wearing shorts and T-shirts.
Yeah.
So I might as well shave my head. So I get in. So when he arrives, we knew. I got like a phone call. He'll be there in 20 minutes. You know, he's driving up from New York to Allaire, and up this winding hill up the Catskill Mountains. But if you just at night, I was scared to death. You could just fall down the mountain.
Yeah.
The car could fall down the mountain. But he comes through, gets out of the limo, and everyone from the studio is greeting him, shaking his hand, and I'm in the mob, you know, with the studio. But I have my head's shaved. And he goes, oh, hello to me. He goes, yeah, nice to meet you. I go, David, it's Tony. And he went, oh.
Do you think that the atmosphere of a particular studio, for example, that one, found its way into the music? When you're surrounded by mountains, does the work become different from when you're surrounded by skyscrapers? I mean, is it?
Well, this is the highest point of the highest mountain in that area, in the Catskill Mountains, and we could see the other mountains around us, but we could see endless miles of forest. I mean, as far as the eye could see, you saw the tops of trees, And we couldn't, there were no cities nearby, nothing. I mean, there was Woodstock nearby, but even the trees were obscuring the view of Woodstock, you know. We did go to Woodstock now and then to just get the hell out of there.
Yeah.
You know, the studio could, you know, it was like a prison at one point, because you couldn't even go down the hill on a bicycle. You would have died. You would have gone off the edge. So anyway, you know, it was a great place. The isolation was good for him. It helped him concentrate. He brought the family up for a few days, and that was nice. And then, of course, you know, 9/11 happened after they went back. They should have stayed, you know, if we had known. But they went back, and that was a very worrisome time. It took them about 2 days to get phone contact. Because, you know, all the lines went down.
Yeah, of course.
You know, they bombed the World Trade Center, and it fell to bits, and all the telephone lines were gone.
Yeah.
Horrible time.
It must have been horrible to be up there and just not knowing. Not knowing. Wow. I think at the time, some critics or reviewers sort of surmised that it was a sort of the album was a kind of a response to 9/11, but actually the songs were pretty much in place by then anyway, weren't they? I think
this is where he's clairvoyant. Honestly, David was a remarkable person. Like some of his songs described 9/11 before it happened, if you listen to that album again. And it was very eerie, very eerie.
And I think it was round about the time of Heathen, I'm just popping back in the TARDIS now, that you started talking with David about the possibility of having another look at the Lodger album, which was one that you'd never been quite happy about the mix. And you ended up doing, of course, this remixed version of Lodger. So I wanted to ask you about that. It's an interesting project, which David was right behind, wasn't he? He was into it.
No.
Oh, was he not?
He never liked to look back. Right. So, like, the Lodger was done. It was out there, it sold records, and he made a statement. But it was a horrible mix because we were in a horrible studio. It was done in France, where they just didn't have the equipment, and it was a great place to make the record, but it wasn't a good place to mix. We tried our best. So yeah, we years later, when he was ill, this is during Blackstar, I had a lot of time on my hands. You know, he booked the studio time, but he didn't show up, and so I took out the Lodge. I had the entire album, and I started remixing it with modern technology, which we didn't have 30 years prior. And it started sounding like kick-ass, like really, really great. And when he came back, I said, do you have 5 minutes? And he goes, sure. He goes, can I play you something? And I played Lodger to him, with the first track.
Fantastic Voyage.
Fantastic Voyage.
Those mandolins, which are a revelation.
The Carlos and me. And so I said, would you like to hear more? He goes, yes, please. And he listened to the whole remix, and he says, I'm going to phone Bill Zisblatt, his manager, and give it the thumbs up, you know, to re-release it.
Excellent. So when you do something like that, I guess you just had to use instinct. I mean, I'm wondering how much sort of leeway you gave yourself, sort of creative freedom, as it were, you gave yourself to change things or put in a different take or whatever it might be. I mean, did you feel that part of the process was not necessarily to be completely faithful to the original?
No, I wanted to make it better than the original, which meant modifying quite a lot of the sound. And, you know, I didn't really add anything. Just better EQs, you know, now engineered in the present day. It's, you know, better than the equipment we had 30 years earlier. And it just paid off. Paid off.
Do we like the Lodger remix? I do. Fantastic. Great stuff.
Ask them who doesn't. Does anyone not like the Lodger remix? Okay, thank you.
It's a vote of thanks. That's good. That's good. Look, guys, there's so much more we could talk. We haven't even talked about Blackstar. We haven't talked about Young Americans. But I note that we have about 10 minutes left. So I feel it's only fair that I ask some of you guys if you'd like to ask any questions. Perhaps you'd like to ask about Blackstar or Young Americans. Anyway, we have some microphones. Yes, we have a gentleman just down here. Let's start with you.
Hello. On Scary Monsters, I can hear an anvil driving out the beat. Were there any other unusual instruments used on any other albums?
Well, what you actually heard was a cowbell going through a guitar pedal, a distortion pedal, and it sounded like an anvil. But where are you going to find an anvil these days? If you know, I'd like to know, actually. No, but it was a cowbell through a guitar pedal, a distortion. We cranked up the distortion, and there it is.
But any other unusual instruments on other albums?
Not that I can think of, just...
Did you tell me once David was bashing an ashtray or something on Heroes? Is that right, or something?
That was on Heroes. Yeah, it was when you get a reel of tape, the professional reels have 2 metal covers over the tape. So we took one of we unscrewed it and had this metal cover, which had a nice sound to it. And he took an ashtray and he was banging it. And these things are very expensive. It was very, and it was useless after that. But we got a great sound.
Yeah,
it's important.
Destroyed it, but it was worth it. It was worth it. Do we have one? Yes, we got someone right at the back there by the. Oh, yeah. How about the one just up at the back there, and then we'll come. There's plenty of time.
Hi, Tony. Brian Eno obviously established himself as a very successful producer not long after those Berlin albums. But I'm wondering, when you committed to working on those albums with David, did you have any concerns that Brian might encroach on your role in that respect?
No, he never tried to act as a producer. He was really good about it. He realized that he was there to be a session man, and he stuck to it. He came up with some great ideas, and it was actually a great pleasure to work with him and an honor to work with him.
And we had another question just... Oh, there's one right, thank you.
Yeah. Going back to Scary Monsters, when it came out, it really felt like a move forwards in terms of the production values. It was shockingly, I think the NME called it Moses bringing down the tablets from the mountain in the review in real time. Do you have an explanation for how you managed to move the sound and the production so far forward at that time in 1980? And my second part of the same question is, do you have any production notes from any of the albums, the choices that you made, still available?
I do have some production notes from Blackstar, and occasionally I've got some pieces of paper saved. Occasionally I look for something and I find something back in the day, so I keep them. Like I found David's little speech in the middle of All the Madmen. He wrote it on a piece of, where have all the horizons lie, on a big piece of manuscript paper, which I was writing an arrangement on. He took a big magic marker and wrote the lyrics out so he could put it in front of him while he recited it. But notes on production I don't really save, because I know what I could hear my albums, and I know from the sound of it I have a visual picture of what I was using. I remember the equipment that I recorded it through. Maybe I should take notes and all that, but then I'd be giving my secrets away. Not going to happen.
There's an extraordinary little story that, if you don't mind, Tony and I have known each other well for quite a few years, and by the most extraordinary coincidence of all time, about a year and a half ago, a friend of mine, presented me with these 2 exercise books, old sort of spiral-bound things. And he said, I got these, they were in a job lot at a record fair, and I don't know what they are, but I thought you might know what they are or be interested, because all I'm seeing is 5 years and Suffragette City and Fame, and these are David Bowie songs, aren't they? But I can't work out what this is. And I said, okay. And he said, well, you can have them anyway, I don't know. So he gave them to me, and I looked through them, and the first thing I recognized, apart from all the Bowie song titles, was that I recognized the handwriting. And I looked through and I thought, what's this? And then I realized that all these, it was Tony's notes for putting together the Stage album. And it was like Philadelphia concert here and whichever one. And also there were some notes of, it wasn't sort of interpretative notes, but they were just record logbook, as it were, and also of some of the Lodger sessions. So I emailed Tony and I said, you're not going to believe what's just fallen into my lap. And I mean, and you said, yeah, God, they went missing from Good Earth whenever, somehow. And extraordinarily, they'd found their way back to me. So, of course, I posted them straight off to New York, and they were reunited with their owner. It was the most extraordinary thing. Do we have another question? Oh, yes, we have someone down here, yeah. Oh, yes, a couple of people down here.
Oh my gosh, look
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Tony. Donnie mentioned that when you did Blackstar, that you recorded some other songs.
Yes.
Any chance of hearing any of those?
Oh,
You said they
I heard
weren't
this
finished.
from the last interview, yeah. You've heard everything.
Heard everything.
Except one song. I can't tell you anything about it. Because I didn't even know I had it. It was a session when Donnie was on this with his band, and they recorded this extra song for Blackstar, and it was gone for years. It just disappeared. And I was going through my hard drives, and I found it. And it's a damn good song, except David didn't sing a vocal over it. What he did do, because it was a live recording, Donnie was in a cabinet for separation, so you didn't hear his saxophone come out onto the drum kit and all that. The whole band was playing the song, and David was singing with the band playing, like the Tim's bass and the guitar and all that. So you hear all these instruments on his microphone, which is usually a no-no, you know, but David is a professional, and he stayed on the mic. So even though the sound was all right, he didn't like move his head like that, and you know, he really stayed on the mic. And I have since mixed it and sent it to his people, his company, and they're thinking about what to do with it next. They like it.
Oh,
It's
fabulous.
a damn good song.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for Scary Monsters as well. Fabulous.
I didn't hear what you said.
And thank you for Scary Monsters as well, doing that. Such a good job on that.
Thank you so much.
And we had someone else around here, did we? Yes, gentleman a couple of rows back.
Hey, thank you so much, Tony. In different interviews I've heard you do, you've mentioned how Bowie was a surprisingly good musician, as in playing piano himself and guitar himself, although we only hear that sporadically in the final recordings. And we also hear Donnie and the others talk about how much space he gave them.
Yeah.
Based on the structures, he had a lot of creative freedom. So give us some examples where he surprised you with his own musicality in terms of instrumentation, where either that came through on the final result, or it surprised you by not coming through, him giving him another musician more freedom.
Good. Yeah, you know, in the V&A Museum, there's this red electric bass by, I think, it's that one that had no pegs over here, but had the pegs down this end. And what's that called?
It's a Hohner imitating a Steinberg.
Okay, it's a Hohner bass, yeah, which I never saw before, but he brought until he brought it in, and he played the bass on some song. I wish I could remember the name of the song, but he had it in the studio, and I didn't play. I usually play bass for him, but he played it for himself, and he had a good idea. He played it well, did a little bit of judicious editing and all that. Well, no, you do that. You do that in general, you know.
Yeah.
If somebody misses a drum beat, you know, like if it's, you know, like the bass plays with the kick drum. If it's a little off with the kick drum, you'll get a thing called a flam, and you don't want a flam. You do not want a flam.
Do we have any more questions? Yes, there's someone just up here.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got to ask. Somebody's got to ask. So there's an alternative mix of Scary Monsters, an early mix that's been on bootleg for ages called Vampires in Human Flesh of the album. I imagine there's other stuff. And as a completionist, we're always looking for these things to surface.
Yeah.
Is there any idea if any of this stuff is going to come out? And are you aware of anything that you would like to come out from the back catalogue that's not out yet?
Well, this thing about outtakes and alternative versions, it's the artist usually sees those as demos and unfinished pieces of music. And they spend lots of money and lots of time making the finished product. And I know fans will go crazy if they hear something that sounds a bit weird and like it, you know, and it's something that you haven't heard before. But it's simply, I wouldn't say it's the fault of the music business that they don't put these things out. Some of them do, actually. Demon Records puts out a lot of alternative versions. If it's a good company for that, and I know those people. They're good people. But generally, an artist does not want you to hear him like farting around, you know.
Fair enough.
They want you to hear him at his best or her best, you know.
Yeah.
So that's your answer to that. You know, the artist is often in control of that, you know.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? I mean, with my fan hat on, obviously I'd love to hear all of everything you've got, all your special stuff. But with my respecting the artist hat on, I totally get it. I mean, he put out what he wanted to put out, and which actually does give me a perfect excuse to bring up Young Americans, which we haven't talked about.
Okay.
And then we'll go back to the questions. Yeah. Young Americans, of course, was the album where, at the very last minute, 2 beautiful tracks were taken off by David because he'd just recorded the 2 with John Lennon at the last minute. Yeah. And I know that was, I mean, of course, eventually they did see the light, and they're amazing, and we hear them now, and we think, my God, it's incredible that those were, you know, sort of cast aside. But I guess that's how the cookie crumbles, right?
Yeah, that's happened to me before, and eventually, like, the tracks did emerge. And the artist, it's the artist's prerogative. Like a producer, my job is to make the artist's dream come true. It's not the other way around.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I don't have a dream. They have the dream, but I'm like God. You know.
You are.
Sorry, God, I didn't mean it. I love you.
So does anyone else have another question for Tony? We need to be winding up fairly soon. Yeah, we've got a chap just here. And then we'll go to, up there, yeah. Oh, have you? Okay, we'll come to you then as well. But yes, sir.
With the theme of time, as a producer, are there things you've learned since you started working with Bowie that if you could go back in time and use them on earlier work, you would? And would a younger you approach his later work in a different way?
Yeah, well, with Space Oddity album, the track Space Oddity was produced by Gus Dudgeon, a good friend of mine at the time, and the rest of the album was produced by me. And I really wasn't up to scratch yet as a mixing engineer. I still had a lot to learn. It was early days for me, so I did remix Space Oddity album. I don't know how you get it, but. A lot of the other tracks, which had some great songs on it, but like, you know, not a very good drum sound. What we do now with some of these older things that were recorded with, I mean, even the engineers weren't that skilled back in the day. You know, you used to get these puny drum sounds. I know Woody Woodmansey doesn't like a lot of his Ziggy recordings because he didn't like the drum sound. But nowadays you could attach a sample to a drum sound. So you could take a nice sound of a single hit off a snare drum and add it onto the puny snare drum like that, and you could make a whole new drum kit out of it. Even the kick drum, you could replace every drum, and that's because of digital recording. You know, something you couldn't do back in the day. But back in the day, I honestly think when I was a kid, I listened to early rock and roll. Engineers were better and musicians were better because they practiced. You know, they didn't have anybody to fix anything. Nowadays, you could fix anything in a recording. You could change the pitch, the tempo, everything. You know, but in those days, you just had to be hot. To get that job, you had to really be hot. You know.
So we've just got time for 2 more questions, right? There's a lady here who's been waiting, and then we'll come to you, sir. Yeah.
Could you just say a little bit about your experience of making Blackstar?
I didn't quite get that.
A little bit about, it'll have to be a little
I know,
bit.
time is running out.
Your experience of making Blackstar.
Oh, my experience making Blackstar. Yeah. Well, it was tragic in a way because I knew what was going on. At the beginning of it, we had, he said, Tony, we have to have a little chin wag. And I never heard that expression before. Have you? Have you heard that? Well, I have heard it.
It's British, I guess. Yeah.
I know, chin wag, which I love. I mean, I guessed what it was. Obviously, I'm not a dummy. So I get summoned up to his office, and where he has this lovely woman, Eileen, who works the office. She takes care of everything and things, David. And we have this chin wag. I go in a room with him, very small room, very small table between us, and he's wearing a woolly hat. And I notice he's got no eyebrows. That means something, right? And I'm going to get choked up now because it meant he had cancer. I've seen it before. So he like jumped over the table and hugged me because I needed it. I couldn't console him. He was already okay with it. I wasn't okay with it. And he hugged me, and we started out with, the next day, We went to the studio. You'll hear Donnie's story. He told the same story to them. Took his hat off. He was bald, no eyebrows. And yet he had the spirit of a young man still. He still wanted to make music, and he knew he didn't have much time left. And from that day, he began Blackstar. He just had this spirit that he was going to get through it all. And, you know, he kept phoning people and saying that he was ill, but he said, right after this album, I'm going to go to the best specialist in New York. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to be fine. And he said, and he phoned me and he said, I've got a new album I'm writing. So there was going to be a follow-up to Blackstar. But I think he was just not, I don't think any of those things were true. I think he was just knowing he wasn't going to make it.
Yeah.
What can I tell you?
But as Donnie was saying earlier on, and the other guys on the Blackstar panel, it's extraordinary that, as you just said as well, you know, the energy and the commitment on that album, and there's something actually incredibly life-affirming, I think, about Blackstar. Yeah. It's not just a doom-laden, woe is me album. It's energetic and yeah. beautiful, and it's actually quite funny in places as well. I mean, I think it's an extraordinary final piece of work. Isn't it?
Well, it was good for him to work with Donnie. It gave him
yeah.
a new lease on life. And, you know, it's a different kind of a band, whereas we couldn't get a rock. We had great rock musicians, but who could play jazz.
Yeah.
But getting them to play rock was
yeah.
wonderful. That was
yeah.
a wonderful experience. And he was a pioneer all to the end. He showed up all the time. He had to leave early. He got tired.
Yeah.
He got tired easily, but he had to leave early some days. And when he came back in the next morning, he was refreshed, and he'd get in and sing his heart out and play his funny-looking bass and whatever, you know.
Yeah. yeah.
And so he went out right. He just
yeah.
did the right thing. I mean, you know, when my end comes, I know I'm going to die in the studio. I know it.
yeah. So we've got one last question. Yes.
Question is, what's your favourite album that you produced? Sorry, start again. The mic went on. Hi, Tony. So what is your favourite album that you produced by David Bowie? But also, what's your favourite album of his that you didn't produce?
Oh, interesting.
Well, my favorite album is Scary Monsters that I produced. We always said, when we began every new album, we'd say, let's make our Sgt. Pepper's. This'll be. We always thought the Beatles did the greatest thing when they made that record, and then really after that they fell to pieces, you know. So we decided that we called it our next. So the Scary Monsters was it. That was going to be. We're going to pull all the stops out, spend as much money as required in studios, and make it in different studios and all that. And that is my favorite album. But I wish. Oh, I can't say this. You know, there were albums he made that I think were very badly produced and not really mixed very well. And I can't really, because it wouldn't be nice. It wouldn't be kind to the people who helped him make those. So, and it's not that I have a high opinion of myself. It's just that I've got a low opinion of them.
But in terms.
I'm sorry.
I'm sure you've told me before that when you heard Hunky Dory, you thought, wow, I didn't know he had that one in him.
Well, Hunky Dory is amazing.
Yeah.
He was with the right people at the right time.
Yeah.
It was a terrific album.
Yeah.
The songwriting was especially the best part of it.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, we're running over wildly, so we've got to wind up in a moment. But just to conclude, I would just like to ask you to reflect. I mean, what strikes me about your partnership with David, it was obviously a very brilliant, creative, professional, musical partnership, but it was also a friend. You were the best of friends for many, many years, and I guess he was a very important person in your life, right?
Oh, of course. And you know, when he phoned me towards the end of Blackstar and all that, was my best friend talking to me again, and he's talking about the next album we're going to make and all that. Friends to the end, you know.
Yeah.
And also, you know, I knew he was ill, and so did Donnie. He did, you know, you saw those last few photos of him with the gray, wispy hair and the glasses. That was David Bowie, you know. You know, it was awful, but he was always a pro.
Yeah.
Always professional. And he wasn't embarrassed to let the public see him like that, to be photographed like that. And he was very, very proud of Lazarus. And It was good. I don't know. I saw the play. It was interesting, you know, because he was trying something very different.
Yeah.
It wasn't your Broadway, you know,
jukebox musical. It wasn't
razzmatazz.
Yeah,
It wasn't that.
yeah.
It was a pretty somber piece of work, you know, and I enjoyed it very, very much. And I remember standing next to his manager while we watched that performance of it with the girl, you know, when the girl was in it and all that. And I knew he was worried. And I said, I got to say something to cheer him up. And I said, I think it's got legs, you know, which is a Broadway expression.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as you say, friends to the end. Time has caught up with us and is waiting in the wings. But for the best chin wag I've had in many a long time, thank you so much, Tony Visconti.
They are fantastic. I think we should invite them back every single year. What a great ending to today. A huge thanks to Nicholas Pegg, to Tony Visconti, to all our guests today who've taken the time to come here to be interrogated or to share their stories or give you tips on drug prices in Berlin, whatever it may be. Also, a massive thanks to all of you for staying with us throughout the day, for coming, for getting tickets, for being part of this. It means an awful lot to me personally because, as some of you know, I do my podcast and I never thought that it would become something like this. So a huge thank you to all of you. But I also want to say a massive thank you to John Fawcett, and his wonderful team here at the British Library who took my idea of doing a little panel. Oh yes, what was that? One little panel, and turned it into this. And they've done a magnificent job. So thank you, John. Thank you, everyone.